So people who are joining us, thanks for logging in and hanging out with me. I'm Kristen Bentley. You guys have seen a lot of me this year for all of our webinars. I'm the RRP's communications manager, and I'm joined by Dr. Kathleen Crandell. I'll let her introduce herself, but we're very excited to have you back, Dr. Crandell. Uh-oh, did your internet go out again?
Oh, thank you. Well, happy to be here. I'm Kathleen Crandell. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, it said it was unstable again, but
yeah, we'll just give everybody a heads up.
So I'm a PhD equine nutritionist. Okay.
You're good. You're back. Uh-oh, you're not back. There you are. Now you're back.
Okay. So, yeah, hello. Sorry. I live in the country, so internet is sometimes tricky. And hopefully we can get through this seminar. Hopefully you can at least hear me if you can't see me. Yeah, so I have a PhD in equine nutrition from Virginia Tech. And I've been working in the feed industry for 23 years coming now, at least with Kentucky Equine Research. That's how long I've been with them. And so I work with feed mills and customers and just regular horse people with trying to help formulate good quality feeds, have good sound diets, and just help horse people with any kind of nutritional problems that they have with their horses. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us. So just as a disclaimer, sometimes Dr. Crandell's internet gets a little funky. So if you guys if she looks like she's frozen, but you can still hear her, then we're doing fine. So just so everybody knows, sometimes it might sound a little funky, but I think we're gonna hopefully be able to get through everybody's questions because we've got a great list of questions tonight. So I think everybody should hopefully come out of here with a lot more information and education. So Dr. Crandell will open, I think, with a good basic question to get everybody started. What do you feed a horse to help it gain weight and muscle, especially if it's in transition from like a high energy feed on the track to a different feed in its second career?
Okay, so when you're trying to get them to gain weight, the first thing to look at is just how many calories they're getting. And so what you want to do is increase the number of calories. Now, what you just said there, Kristen, about coming off the track, usually they're on really, really high grain diets on the track. And then maybe by the time you get them, they will have been on almost like no grain. And so now, and they've gotten a little bit of the racing, the whole racing steroid problem, or at least their bodies have adjusted to not being in that environment. And so now maybe their metabolisms have slowed down a little bit, or come back into like to be more normal. And you want them to gain weight. So you're going to do it by increasing calories. And what I like to always do when I'm talking about increasing calories is to start with the forage. So you can make a difference in the amount of calories just by the quality of forage that you're feeding. So if, let's say you're feeding just a mature Timothy hay, and if you can change that to a mixed grass, alfalfa mixed grass hay, or an orchard grass, a younger, less mature orchard grass, you can actually increase the calories with that alone. Still increase calories with trying to something that's really high in fiber like beet pulp. So that would be another option for increasing the calories from the forage and roughage. So aside from that, then you can also increase calories with the type of concentrate that you're feeding. If you're feeding a concentrate that's designed for like a maintenance horse or something that's really a lower calorie, you can switch to one that is more concentrated in calories, and that usually you'll see by the name of it, it'd be like a performance horse feed. You also can look at the guaranteed analysis, and if it's higher in fat, that usually means it's higher in calories. And so you can increase the calories with the type of concentrate, but you can also increase the calories with the amount of the concentrate, obviously, just feeding more. And then the other way to increase calories in the diet is with some sort of fat supplement, which can be like, which is high in fat or higher in fat, about 20% fat. So those are good ways just to be looking at calories in the diet. Management wise, you would want to feed smaller, more frequent meals. You don't really want to ever feed more than 5 pounds of a concentrate in a feeding at one time. So you're better off with like 3 meals a day or 4 meals a day if you're feeding large amounts of a concentrate. And then for muscle is also something that you see that decreases and gets lost when there's not enough protein in the diet. So you may, for muscle, you want to just make sure that you're giving the horse a concentrate that has enough protein, like a 12 or a 14% protein. But even if that isn't good enough, you can get an amino acid supplement that can also boost the protein content of the diet. So Kristen, are you hearing me okay? I mean, I'm going to try something different. Maybe not.
No, we can hear you pretty well. And
is it coming through okay?
I think everybody, anybody, if you are having trouble hearing everything that Dr. Crandell is saying, I know she breaks up a little bit, but I think we're getting the meaning, right? I haven't seen anyone commenting saying, we can't hear you. So I think it's working okay. So I think we're going to keep going.
Okay.
If that works for you.
I can try switching to the mobile hotspot. Okay. Okay.
Oh, yep. I just got a comment that they're all hearing you great. So I think we'll just carry on the way we are. Okay. Go with that. So, okay. Fabulous. Thanks, everybody. All right. So to summarize, the really, really boiled down version of that question of how to get a horse to gain weight and gain muscle is more calories. And of course, the muscle is going to come from a good source of protein. To really boil that down, just to get everybody caught up. Okay,
yeah,
so
for muscle gain, if you're trying to develop muscle, exercise. Yeah. So exercise is also the most really important for muscle gain because you can add all the protein that is, but without working that muscle so that it can help. So the exercise with the protein supplement is the muscle gain.
Perfect. Okay. So when you're looking to, build a feeding program, I've seen this happen a lot on the internet where people will consult their friends to try to pick a brand of feed or to look for feed suggestions. And if you watch any of these threads on Facebook, you'll get about 1,000 different suggestions. And I honestly don't know how anybody starts with information like that, because it seems like just about every brand of feed in the world is suggested to people when they're trying to build a feed program. So how do you start? Do you just walk into the feed store and just pick a bag that looks good? What's a good way to get started if you're looking to build a feed program for your horse?
Okay, so what I usually start with is But I start with this trying to decide what you want to accomplish with this feeding program. And that'll help you figure out what you want from the feed. So like the first question might be, are you just trying to balance the diet for protein, vitamins, and minerals? Maybe the horse has enough weight, maybe he has enough energy, you just need a balanced diet. Well, then that would make your selection right there pretty easy, because then you would go with a ration balancer. And just about every feed company, modern feed company nowadays, makes their own version of a ration balancer. So, but if the horse needs some calories as well as the protein, vitamins, and minerals, then you would go with like a conventional feed or so. Then the next question might be, does your horse need to be on a low starch diet? Does he not do well with excessive amounts of starch? Or does he need to have that starch in the diet to get enough energy to be able to get his job done? So that would be the next question. Do you need a low starch feed or a conventional feed or like a feed that has a combination of all the energy sources, fat, starch, and fiber? And then another question you would ask, well, what is the form that is more important to you? Do you prefer a pelleted feed because it's much more convenient, it doesn't freeze up in the wintertime? Or do you like a textured feed where you can actually see what's in it? You can see that there's grains, you can see that there's beet pulp. So just the form that you want is what you decide. So these are like personal choices. And then you might look at like, what type of horse are you feeding? So you want to choose a feed that's been formulated for that type of horse and the horse's activity. So you want to, and usually it's in the name somehow on these horse feeds. So if you're looking for a performance horse feed, it will somehow state that it's for a performance horse. If it's not in the name, it'll be listed on the feed tag, suitable for performance horses, because you don't want to be feeding a broodmare feed to a performance horse, basically. So now we're kind of narrowing down the choices. Then you can look at how you want that energy supplied from that feed. So some of the feeds are low fat, some are moderate fat, some are high fat. And fat is concentrated calories. So, but fat is also pricier. So would you like a high fat feed? Do you want those calories? Or do you prefer to add, like if you want a high fat feed, but you don't want to pay the price, then you can always add your own oil, that kind of thing. So the next question is, how important is it to you that the formulation is fixed? And what I mean by that is, when a feed company makes a feed, they can do a fixed formulation, which means that it always has the same amount of the same ingredients, or they can just do a least cost formulation, which is when the price of one commodity changes or goes up, then they're going to reformulate the feed and then adjust it so they can keep it in the same price point, but the formulation will be fluctuating, it'll be changing. So how important is that to you? If that doesn't really bother you at all that it changes, then usually those are the more economical feeds. And that's why they're economical, because they're trying to keep a certain price point. Then the next question might be, how important is it to you that this feed mill adds things like probiotics or enzymes? Are you adding your own probiotics? Do you think your horse doesn't really need probiotics? There's lots of bacteria already in their bodies, and they don't need any more extra. Or so those are like something that you would be finding in the more premium type of feeds, the probiotic and the enzymes. So if you don't really think that you need to be adding that, then you can look at a lower price point feed than the premiums. And then another question that you may want to ask is, how important is it to you that the mill where the feed is made doesn't make other livestock feeds that use medications? So like the ionophores, like Rumensin, or making poultry feed and some of the ionophores they use in those. So it's a big thing that they're trying not to have horse feed contaminated, because it's very expensive when a horse dies because of Rumensin poisoning. So they have different practices where they flush and they sequence the feed so that there's less chance of contamination. But how important is that to you? There are mills that are dedicated to just making horse feed, or dedicated to feed that does not contain any sort of medications in it. Like organic mills, for example, they are not allowed to have medications in the mill. So there's like a really, really minute chance that you might ever get Rumensin poisoning from organic feed. So that helps you narrow down the brands a little bit. So, but the question about like what brand, and a lot of it will depend on what part of the country you're in, what's available to you. Now, most of the big brand names make decent, really good horse feed. And there are smaller mills that can make a really decent horse feed. And then there's some mills that, that it's really not their main source of income. So they just put, whatever in a bag and call it horse feed, or some multi-use, multi-species feed or something like that. But in general, the big names make a good quality feed. So maybe it'll be just a question of what's available to you. And then if you find that brand that is available, and then you go through the questions I just went through, then that'll help you narrow down the choice of what's the right food for your horse.
Good, yeah, quite the process, but a necessary process for sure. So now let's say that you've chosen your grain or your feed that you want to feed, and you've put your horse on that for a little while and you're not seeing results yet. How long do you want to give a feed program before you decide it's not working for your horse? I know some people are like, I haven't seen any change in a week, we're throwing it out. How long would you give it before you decide, maybe we're going to try something else, maybe this horse needs more time?
Yeah, so, I mean, you can't get a horse to gain weight overnight. Well, except maybe, like, we have really, really lush green grass right at the moment. And so I swear my horse has gained 100 pounds in 2 days. But other than that, you really, I mean, if you're looking at a feed and you're trying to see if it's working for you, you have to give it time. I like to say a month every time to see if you have one using that feed, whether you're seeing the change that you wanted, that you're looking for.
Okay, so like about a month or so, and then you can decide if it needs to get tweaked from there.
Yes.
Okay. And then would you think to go like the supplement route after that? Or would you think, well, maybe we just need more feed. Maybe we need, a higher protein feed from the same brand. Maybe we need more fat. Like which route do you take if you're not, like, let's say the horse isn't developing muscle, but he's in regular work. What would you do for that?
Yeah, that would have been the first thing, is just to figure out what's not working for you. So for example, if the horse is not gaining the weight that you'd expected, then it could be a question of you're just not feeding enough. I mean, look at the feeding rates, recommended feeding rates on the bag. But I mean, it may just be a question of you're only feeding 1 scoop. Well, maybe he really actually needs 2, So maybe, so but if you think that you're feeding plenty of it and you're not seeing the results, then you need to kind of go back and kind of go through some of the questions that I just went through, like, do you think this horse needs a higher fat feed? And then maybe you would switch, or maybe you would just add fat. It could be like you're just not feeding the right kind of feed. So maybe you bought a maintenance horse feed and they're expecting to see a lot of weight gains, but that if you're using a maintenance horse feed, it's going to take a long time to see the progress. So you just want to go back and try to find a feed that is higher in calories, it's designed and formulated for the kind of horse that you're feeding. And then if worse comes to worse, you can just contact a nutritionist and see if they can give you a hand in trying to figure out how you can get more weight on your horse.
Yeah, consulting a professional is always a good idea, and they will rarely steer you wrong. So I made a mistake when I was preparing my horse for the makeover in 2018. I misunderstood how a ration balancer worked, and I was feeding that like several pounds as his primary grain. And it wasn't actually until the KER nutrition webinar in 2018 that someone explained to me how a ration balancer actually worked. So just in the event that anyone else is also confused, ration balancers on the bag, will look like they have a really high protein percentage. So you're thinking like, woo, yeah, this is going to get my horse nice and muscled up. And that's not really how they work. So maybe you could quickly steer us to what a ration balancer does, when you feed it, and how that works in your bigger feeding program.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So actually, ration balancers are my favorite type of feed. And it's usually what I use as the base of my feeding program here with our horses, because you can build like a whole diet from a ration balancer. But what a ration balancer is, it's a concentrate feed, usually comes pelleted, and it's usually higher in protein, higher in the minerals and the vitamins. It's more concentrated. And the reason why it's higher in all those nutrients is because the idea is you should only have to feed a little bit. So, and then since it's more concentrated, then, as they would if you're feeding a larger quantity of a regularly formulated feed. The ration balancer feeding rates usually are somewhere around 1 pound to 2 pounds a day. If you feed more than that, like you did, Kristen, you are over supplementing, particularly with the protein, the vitamins, and the minerals. So it's good. It's a good idea to look at the feeding recommendations on the bag of a ration balancer. And how do you know it's not feeds or ration balancer? Usually it's somewhere in the name, like it may be called balancer or balance, or and then in the description of the product, it'll say ration balancer or something like that. It usually is not a good way to get calories into a horse. The ration balance is great for those horses that don't need extra calories. Because you're feeding a small amount, and so they're not typically a very calorie dense type of feed. So you can take a ration balancer and you can feed that by itself with all the free choice forage or forage, whatever kind of forage you're feeding your horse, and that's like a low calorie diet.
All right, we lost Kathleen. Oh, wait, maybe you're back.
Do you see me now?
Yes, now you're back. Yep, you just left for a minute. It's okay, you're back now.
Like I told you, the internet is a challenge here.
That's all right, we got you back. So as long as I don't go down, the webinar still rolls. So
okay, good. Anyway, so the ration balancer, you can feed it by yourself, like by itself with forage, and then you have like a low calorie diet. Or if you just, you can feed that and then maybe some added oats if you need more calories in the diet. But that balancer has already balanced out what might be low or missing in the forage. And so the only thing that the oats would be doing, I guess, is just adding more calories. So, or you can feed it, if you are feeding a regular formulated commercial feed and you're not feeding their minimum recommended feeding rate. Let's say you're feeding this feed and it says feed 5 pounds a day and you're only feeding 1. So their horses are not getting all the nutrients that intended by the feed. Well, you can top it off with a ration balancer. So you could do something like that, 1 pound of the ration balancer, 1 pound of that feed. And so it's a way to balance out a diet when you're not using a feed in the correct manner. So the other, I guess that was, so those are the different ways. And that's why I say it's like my favorite feed for my barn, because I can tailor the diets of all my different horses with that. So everybody gets their pound of ration balancer, and then, oh, this one needs, he's getting a little skinny, so he's getting something else on top of it. Well, that one is my super easy keeper, so they just get that 1 pound of balancer and they're happy just to be getting something to eat anyway. So that's why it's such a versatile type of feed that you.
Yeah. And I think what's important to note is that you're using that to balance then your forage diet first,
Yes.
like you're looking at the hay and the grass that they're getting in, then you add your balancer, and then from there, then you add your additional grain. So you're building that diet based on the grass and the hay that they're taking in, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay. Good. That's a much easier way to think about it than the way I think I taught myself from a feed label. So thank you for that. Now, so speaking of forage, a hot topic this year in the trainers group is the grain-free diet. And I know when you and I were chatting this morning, you made a very interesting face about the grain-free diet. So I'm interested in your thoughts on what a grain-free diet is, when you might choose to feed a grain-free diet, and what it should mean.
Okay, so but let's kind of be clear about what grain-free is. Grain-free means that there's no grain in it. Now, my problem with the term is that some people, they buy a horse feed and they think it's grain-free. A true grain-free diet is something like a horse that's out on grass and that's all he's eating is pasture. That's grain-free. It's grass, that's it. Like a horse that might be getting grass and a mineral supplement, salt mineral supplement, that's grain-free. Even if a horse is getting like beef pulp and grass or hay and a mineral supplement, that's still grain-free. But the minute you add a commercial feed, it's really hard to make a commercial feed grain-free. To be grain-free, it would have to be an alfalfa pellet, maybe with some sort of minerals and vitamins. That would be grain-free. But most, I say 95% of commercial feeds have some sort of grain. It may not have oats, barley, or corn on the label, but if you look carefully, it might say wheat middlings or soy hulls. So those are all byproducts of grain. So technically, it can't be called a grain-free diet if it has wheat middlings or soy hulls or something like that. So that's just my pet peeve about the term. I'm afraid people, what they're doing is mistaking a low starch feed, which has maybe alfalfa, it has alfalfa meal, it has soy hulls, maybe beef pulp. I mean, really low amounts of grain, but in order to make it into a feed, there's probably some wheat middlings in there. So it actually might have a little bit of grain.
So some of that might depend then on the reason that someone's choosing to feed, like grain-free or low starch, which can be the same thing, but aren't always the same thing.
Yeah. So if you have a horse that is insulin sensitivity, equine metabolic syndrome, or maybe even some Cushing's horses, you have to be careful with the amount of starch in their diet. So then you'll be looking for a low starch. They could go on a grain-free diet. That's fine. Again, but if you're looking for the solution in a bag for that kind of horse, it's probably not going to be grain-free, but they do just as well on a low starch feed. I mean, there are feeds on the market that are pretty darn low starch. So, I mean, you're looking at like anywhere 15% and below is pretty low starch. So, yeah, so that's, now I'm kind of lost where I was going with that. But
a little bit of a semantics argument too. So, I mean, that's, easy to get hung up there. So, what would be some of the reasons, like a valid reason that you would recommend a truly grain-free diet for a horse?
Okay, so there are a couple of reasons. Again, the horses that truly have issues with starch would benefit from grain-free or a low starch feed. Horses that are very easily excitable, I would try that, either those, either low starch or grain-free with that kind of horse, because some horses are sensitive to starch, and so it makes them a little bit more, excitable. So these types of feeds might have a calming effect on them. The only problem you might see is like when these horses are on grain-free or low starch diets, is sometimes they just don't have the energy to do the work that you're asking them to do. And that's when maybe a little bit of starch is a good thing, because then they have a little bit more get up and go. And, you don't want them dying on you as they're going over the jump, halfway through a jumping course. So you might need a little bit of starch with that kind of horse.
Mm-hmm. What would be some considerations then to make sure you're still getting appropriate amounts of fat and protein if you're attempting to go on that grain-free diet?
Yes. So if you're trying to do it yourself with your forage, maybe you're buying alfalfa pellets, or maybe you're buying hay pellets, you're safer trying, well, not safer, but if you're going to try to do it with the pellets, and if protein is a concern, then you're better off with the alfalfa pellets, because they are higher in protein than hay pellets. And if you're just feeding, a pound or two a day, that's not too much protein. So that's not usually an issue. The problem, again, trying to do that, make your own like grain-free type of feed, is balancing the diet. So like the ration balancer makes that easy, balancing the forage in the diet. But when you're trying to do that, most of the ration balancers have some kind of grain, again, like either wheat middlings or some kind of grain. So if you're trying to do this by yourself, you're gonna have to figure out the right vitamin mineral supplement to pick or choose to try to balance out what might be missing or low in the forage. And then of course, you're always offering salt, free choice salt, to make sure that they get enough sodium in the diet.
So a little more work maybe to build, a balanced diet from a grain, or not having a grain or a ration balancer base. So that's good to know. So we have actually a number of submitted questions about grain-free, and then about various other issues. So I'm going to get into some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then we'll also try to tag some of the questions that I see coming in as we go. So let's see, the first question that we had submitted from Caitlin is, my horses get free choice hay that is about 50% alfalfa. They easily maintain weight on hay and a ration balancer. How important is it to know the nutrient content of your hay when choosing a grain or a ration balancer? And are average test values from your region sufficient? And that's a good question, because we haven't really talked about hay testing yet.
Yeah. So you can use those average test values as long as your hay is decent quality. Then they might give you a good idea, and then you could use them to try to choose the right grain. Let's say in this example, when she said that the horses are getting hay that's 50% alfalfa, there are different kinds of ration balancers. There's ration balancers that are made to balance out grass hay, and then there's ration balancers that are specially designed for alfalfa. And with that amount of alfalfa, she may want to consider using the alfalfa balancer type product. And the difference between the ration balancers is usually the amount of protein and the amount of calcium, because alfalfa is a lot higher in protein and a lot higher in calcium than most grass hays. So that would be the one thing I would suggest. She could probably have her hay tested, and then she'd know for sure whether her hay falls into the category where she should be using the grass balancer, or whether she should be using an alfalfa balancer.
Good to know. Okay. I segued in the wrong order. I should have segued us with this next question, also from Caitlin, which is about grain-free diets. That she's seen a lot of great results with grain-free diet.
Yeah.
I've had horses that have struggled to gain weight, but have bloomed as soon as I removed grain products. So what should I consider when formulating a grain-free diet? We did cover that a little bit, but this next question, part of this question is pretty good. If my horse is maintaining weight and muscle, do I need to add anything to a grain-free diet besides vitamins, minerals, salt, and fat?
Okay, so if her grain-free diet is like the true one, so she's just eating forage or roughage, then yes, she should eat. Even though, you know, I think there's another question that comes up later about like if the horse looks good, how do you know if he's missing, if he's missing anything in the diet? But this is one where I would definitely recommend that she get some type of mineral supplement. If the horses are on good, green, high quality pasture, then maybe they don't need that many, the extra vitamins, but they definitely would need the minerals and the salt. Now, if the horses are not maintaining their weight and she doesn't want to add grain, then of course she can add some added fat, dietary fat, like oil, to help boost the calorie count of the diet. And also she may need a little bit of oil just to improve the coat quality of the horses if she's not seeing like the bloom that you can get from fat. That I mean, she says they blossom when she removes the grain products, but yeah, maybe they that added fat might give them a nice little shine to the coat. Again, with these horses, as long as they are maintaining, they have the energy that they need to do the work that she's asking them to do, then that's absolutely fine. But if she finds them lacking get up and go, or a little bit of spark in their performance, then she may end up needing to add some type of grain or starch to the diet.
So generally, if it's not broke, don't overfix it. Like if they look good and they're performing well, then they're probably doing okay if she's already supplementing the vitamins and the minerals. And so I think I'm going to go ahead and jump to her question about that. If the horses look good on the outside, and it's possible that a horse can look good on the outside, but maybe it's not getting the vital nutrients. So what are some indicators that a horse is truly getting everything that it needs? And what are some indicators that they might be lacking specific nutrients? And this is kind of tricky because, in this question, she says like, okay, we realize they can look good on the outside, but we don't really know what's going on inside. So how do you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can start like with the obvious things. So, like if a horse isn't getting enough water, well, then you can do a skin test. You just pinch their necks, and if the skin has to go back to normal within 3 seconds, if it just kind of stays tented a little bit too long, then well, that's obvious the horse needs more water. So that's maybe too obvious, but like a nutrient like protein, when the horse is starting to lose muscling, losing top line, that might be an indication that maybe they're lacking in protein in the diet. If they're lacking in carbohydrates, they may not have the energy to get up and go that you need. So that's, if a horse is lacking fiber in the diet, one of the indications is you might see them eating manure. Another indication, if they're missing fiber in the diet, is they might be chewing wood. So I know that with some of these this time of year in the spring, at least not you with the snow, but us with the green grass, that the horses, there's a lot of water in that grass, and so they're not getting enough fiber, and so then you'll see them start chewing on fences and trees and all kinds of things. So throwing them a little bit of dry hay has to be pretty tasty for them to leave the grass, but just getting that, if they would eat a little bit of hay, that helps boost the fiber in the diet and maybe stops them from chewing all your fences down. Things like the calcium and phosphorus, the major minerals, if there's extreme imbalances, like if there's more phosphorus in the diet than calcium, then you're going to see things on the outside, because one of the problems is this disease called big head, where it's called big head because their noses kind of get enlarged, and then they start depositing this strange cancellous bone, so on their noses and on their things. So that's obvious on the outside if you've got a calcium phosphorus imbalance. The other sign of big head disease is also lameness. So that kind of brings me to why it's more difficult to see, when you get down to the vitamins and the microminerals, to see if there's something really missing in the horse's diet, because it can be really subtle. Let's take, for example, zinc. It's a mineral that's needed in very small amounts in the diet, but it has quite a number of different roles in the body. So one of the things is that that zinc can assist in the cellular uptake of glucose. And glucose is the fuel for the cell. So a horse that has a zinc deficiency may be lacking in energy, but how would you ever be able to trace back that it was the zinc that was the cause of the horse not having energy? So I mean, that's why what I mean about it being really subtle. Copper, for example, is really important in cartilage, and so if you have a copper deficient diet, the horses may get lame, but it's hard for people to make that association back, for that lameness was caused by copper deficiency. So that's what we usually do with things like that, because it's so hard to see from the outside, that we just try to evaluate a diet and just make sure that the diet has enough, the minimum, at least the minimum recommended amounts of these minerals and vitamins. One little thing that I always find that's kind of telltale is the hair coat. When a horse has like a rough, not a great hair coat, there's a chance that it could be that there's something missing in the horse's diet.
So yeah, so generally going back to, if a horse looks good, it's probably eating what it should be eating, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Generally speaking.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as much as you can know. Yeah, that's a good point. How would you ever know what mineral is lacking unless you're able to test for it? So good questions.
And the other problem is the blood. Just doing blood analysis doesn't always tell you whether something's really deficient or not, because let's say take calcium, for example. The body is trying to maintain the same level of calcium in the blood. It's called a homeostatic level. And so it will take calcium out of the bone to get that level, that homeostatic level in the blood, or it will be taking calcium out of the blood and putting it, into bone or somewhere else, if calcium's too high in the diet. So the blood sample really doesn't give you a picture of what's going on with calcium in the diet, because the body is working hard to keep it all at the same level. So that's a little bit of the frustrating part of being a nutritionist, is I wish you could just do a blood sample or a hair sample or something.
Test.
Oh, okay. Yeah, now I know what the problem is, but no,
right. Okay.
It's not that easy.
So if you feel like you're doing your best in your research, you're probably okay.
Yeah. The one blood there's actually two things that blood's pretty good, is vitamin E and selenium. So if those are lacking in a diet, you actually can test blood and see if it's a problem.
Okay, good deal. One more question from Caitlin, also about minerals. I have read that excess iron can restrict hoof growth and bleach coats. Are those claims valid? And how concerned should I be about excess iron in my horse's water, hay, and feed?
Okay, well, iron, well, that's a hard subject. That was a joke.
Hey, was that a pun? I liked it. I was with you.
Sorry. Yeah, so so excess iron wouldn't be directly responsible for the bleaching of coats. Usually what's happening with bleaching of coats is there might be a deficiency of copper and zinc. Excessive amounts of iron can interfere with zinc. And so it causes a secondary zinc deficiency. So indirectly, yep, maybe high iron might be causing the bleach coats, but we have, it's hard to know how much excessive iron, is excessive. At KR, we've seen, how much iron it would take to cause a zinc deficiency. We've done a lot of mineral studies at Kentucky Equine Research and tried to find how, if something is interfering with the absorption of other minerals. And we just haven't found anything at a level of iron that interferes with other nutrients. Maybe that we just haven't fed high enough levels for that, but at this point, we really haven't found, in a normal diet, we haven't found enough iron to cause this sort of deficiency. So the bleach coat, I would definitely be looking also at the other components of the diet than iron. How concerned should you be about excess iron in the horse's water, hay, and feed? Okay, in the feed, if it's a commercial feed, I wouldn't be too concerned because there are some ingredients that may make the iron content of a feed a little bit higher than is required by the horse, but that we still haven't. They're not going to be putting out on the market a feed that would have enough iron that would cause problems in the horse. Hay, that is a good question because there are certain zones of that where the soils are really high in iron, and so people are seeing pretty high levels of iron in their hay. But those are pretty specific areas, but the average forages that people are that we're buying in this country shouldn't have too much iron. The other thing is, like, the iron that is in the soil, the form of iron in the soil is not as bioavailable as the form of iron that's in the plant itself. And so if you did, for example, a forage analysis of hay and it came back pretty high in iron, you'd have to, unless you had washed that grass before you, washed that hay before you sent it in, there is a possibility there's a lot of soil on that hay that caused that level of iron to be high. And so if it was soil, that the absorption is pretty low in the horse. Iron absorption is pretty low already. It's only about 15 to 20% of the iron that the horse eats actually gets absorbed. Water, there are places where there's high levels of iron in the water, and usually it's not a problem. But if you think that you have super high levels of iron in the water, you may want to get a water test done to have that checked to see if it might be causing problems in your horses. But in general, the typical diets, the iron shouldn't be a concern. Where it can be concerned is if you're supplementing iron. And I have yet to find a horse's diet that's deficient in iron. So I don't really see the point of feeding an iron supplement, particularly since it does not do what, with humans, it helps boost the red blood cell count, like particularly women that might have low, might be anemic from blood loss. But in horses, only the horses that have had severe blood loss respond to iron supplementation. So there's really no, it's not going to make the horse have any more red blood cells just by adding iron into the diet. So I don't see any reason to be giving an iron supplement to start with.
Okay. Is there any evidence that iron contributes or I guess restricts hoof growth? That's also going to segue to Betty's question. She's asking about what feed to feed for feet. So is there any concerns first with iron hoof growth?
Yeah, now again, it would have to be really excessive amounts of iron to restrict hoof growth. Okay, so
good to know.
It's normally just in a normal horse's diet is not a concern.
Okay. Now, what would you feed if you were, I guess, Betty's question is, what about feed for feet? So I'm assuming Betty means what kind of diet would you give to a horse to encourage good hoof growth?
Good hoof growth, okay. A balanced diet is important so that the horse has all the nutrients that it needs to, like just to have normal body processes, and one of them being hoof growth. So a good balanced diet. So there have been reports that the horses on higher fat diets seem to have better feet, a little more flexible hooves. If you have a horse that has crumbly hooves or problem feet and you are feeding him a balanced diet, then I would go to a hoof supplement. Because for horses that have problems with their feet, many of them do respond to therapeutic levels of biotin. I mean, this is the amount of biotin well above what the requirement normally is. But so that's why I call them therapeutic levels. But some horses do respond well to the biotin, and then look for a hoof supplement that also would have zinc, because zinc is also another one of those nutrients that you see a response in the hoof quality poor quality hoofs if it's deficient, and then response in the hoof quality if it's added into sufficient in the diet. A lot of hoof supplements have a lot of other things in them, but at least they should have a certain amount of biotin, like 15 to 20 milligrams per dose would be recommended for a good quality hoof supplement.
Okay. Good. Hopefully that helps you, Betty, to feed for better feet. I'm going to jump around a little bit on our pre-submitted questions because I just want to make sure we get to some of these others, because Caitlin sent in a lot. So Caitlin will circle back around to some of your questions. We're going to jump to a question from Jennifer. Is it unhealthy to feed too much hay stretcher? I use Purina Impact hay stretcher and feed 2.5 quarts 5 times per day. The horses also get 2 quarts of Omaline 400 twice daily with the 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. hay stretcher feeding. They also have 24/7 access to orchard grass hay and get 2 huge flakes of Western alfalfa per day. The majority of horses in my barn are still racing and are just here on layup or are recovering from surgery or injury. My personal ex-race horses are all in the same feed program in addition to night turnout on grass. All the horses look great and are borderline fat, but is too much hay stretcher a bad thing nutritionally? That's quite the question. But thank you for all the background information, Jennifer.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's actually really important information to know, because so for those of you that don't know what a hay stretcher is, it's a commercial feed that's been formulated to provide a lot of forage for the horse in a, like, it's usually a pelleted form. So it's great for when forage is limited in where you are, if the forage is poor quality or all you can get is poor quality forage. It's great to have this to be able to like top up your forage. Some of them you'll see, it'll say that they're considered a complete feed. And what they mean by complete is it's complete with the forage and the other things that the horse needs in their diet. So the vitamins, the minerals, the vitamin, the vitamins, minerals. You should have enough protein, and so it could be like the sole feed for that horse. And like when I looked at the Purina website for this hay stretcher that you were talking about, they do say that it could be fed as a complete feed. Now that's great for those horses that maybe have a problem where you can't feed them hay. And so this would be like the right type of product. One indication on whether it's the right type is if you look at crude fiber, it needs to be at least 25%. That means that it will have enough fiber, enough forage, roughage in it to be able to maintain the horse's digestive tract in a good functioning manner. The other indication, like whether it's be a complete feed, is if you look at the feeding recommendations. Now, this amount that you are feeding, for me, I don't see a problem with how you're feeding this hay stretcher, because these horses are getting additional hay. They are out on pasture, or some of them are out on pasture, but the fact that they're getting some long stem hay, I think is the best way to feed a hay stretcher. I mean, that's why it's called a stretcher. It's supposed to help complement what might be the amount of forage that might be low or missing in the diet. So the reason why I think that the fact that you're feeding the hay with it is really good is because when I was an undergraduate, I did a little research experiment of feeding a hay stretcher, but as a complete feed. The horses got nothing else but these pellets, and they got it twice a day, and they turned into beavers. Everything wood in sight of them was chewed. Like our fences, they went like this, wavy fences. The inside the stalls, anything wood they could get their hands on, they were beavers. So that's the biggest problem with like feeding a complete feed that is just pelleted. The horses just have this natural desire to chew. And when you feed them something like a complete feed, and they're getting like 1 or 2 or 3 meals a day, they finish it a lot quicker than they would their hay. So then they're bored. So then they start looking for something to chew on, because they just have that innate desire to chew. So you're doing it right with doing this hay stretcher. I don't think you're feeding too much. You didn't give me a weight. I'm a big fan for knowing the weight of something. You just said quarts, I believe. And I don't know how much 2 quarts is. So it's just hard to really know. But I was just assuming that if you were doing that 2.5, 5, I was just kind of going, like maybe if that was a pound per quart, then 2.5, 5 times a day would be 12.5 pounds of hay stretcher. So if you want to know if you're feeding too much, you can look like at the percent body weight. So if your horses are 1,200 pound horses and they're getting 12 pounds of this hay stretcher a day, that's 1% of their body weight. Horses generally eat around 2% of their body weight. So you haven't gone over the 1%. I mean, I don't think that should be a problem as long as they're maintaining. And they have the other hay available to chew on when they need to chew. So I had a couple notes. Yeah. So I think that was, did I answer the question?
Yeah, I guess the boiling her whole question down was just, is there any nutritional reason that feeding that much hay stretcher is a bad thing? And it sounds like no, generally. Like because she's got this whole complete diet going on, and feeding plenty of hay. I think that's the important takeaway. If someone is listening and thinking like, oh, great, I can just feed more hay stretcher, less hay, that's not the message you should be leaving with because Jennifer's so much, of the long stem forage that you mentioned. So, and lots of it, it sounds like she's got 24/7 access to orchard grass hay and 2 huge flakes of Western alfalfa. So the horses are getting lots of good quality forage in addition to the hay stretcher. So,
yeah.
All right, excellent. All right, so we have a question from Elise. My horse has a little bit of rain rot, and I understand that this is nutritional. How do I know what to change in her diet? That's
Okay.
interesting to me because I've always thought of rain rot as just being from wet horses, but I know that that's not necessarily the case. So I'm interested in this one too.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. It's from it doesn't necessarily have to be nutritional. I mean, it could be just the circumstances. Their wet coat, really wet year, maybe they have a lot of dirt in their coat, and so then the skin doesn't dry out and just stays damp, and then you get rain rot. But if it is a nutritional thing, it's probably a question of the immune system of the horse, and making sure that the horse has a balanced diet and getting sufficient amounts of those of the vitamins and the minerals in particular, and good quality protein will help that immune system fight. So so in that sense, that's about the only thing you can do nutritionally for rain rot, is just make sure you're feeding the horse well, and then after that, then you just have to treat it. I mean, if they're getting everything they need, then you just have to treat it.
Okay. I'm just going to check in with our Facebook viewers. I know we've gotten a couple of questions in on Zoom, which is awesome. Is anybody watching on Facebook? Do any of you guys have any questions that you'd like Dr. Crandell to answer now? Because otherwise we'll circle back through to some of the early submitted questions that we haven't tackled yet. But if you guys do have questions, just put them in the chat and I will grab them and we'll get those answered too. I know a lot of people have been commenting all week that they were just looking forward to just learning more in general, just from other people's questions, which is great because I think this is certainly one of those topics that we could talk about for hours and hours and hours and just scratch the surface. So, so again, if anyone has any questions, just jot them down and we'll get to those. But otherwise, we'll circle back around a little bit. One question that we didn't tackle early on that I think is probably always on the forefront of every thoroughbred person's mind is, what do you want to feed a horse that you suspect either has gastric ulcers or, well, ulcers in general, or any kind of gastric issues? That's usually the hot topic for thoroughbred people, is it's ulcers. So, so how do you build a diet to support a horse that you think might have some ulcer issues?
Okay. So do you want to, should we do that one question about the oats first?
Sure. Yeah, because I know actually, so Caitlin's asked me this question too a few times, so I'm calling her out right now. She's she has a horse that she thinks has some gastric issues and has potentially some issues with oats in the diet. So yeah, let's tackle the oats first. So this is another question from Caitlin. Can oats contribute to gastrointestinal issues such as inflammation and ulcers? So we'll go to oats first, then we'll go to the whole diet.
Okay. So there is research that shows that high grain diets, now when I'm talking about grain, like corn, barley, I mean, oats is included, they're all grains. So high grain diets can increase the risk of a horse developing ulcers. And that's because the amount of starch in those grains increase the amount of prostaglandin production in the stomach, which increases the chance of gastric ulceration. So, but what I want to point out in those studies is that these are, the risk is with the amount of grain, so high grain amounts. And you do not have an increased risk if you're feeding small amounts of grain. But I think it's good to point out that oats are different than corn and barley, even though they're a type of grain. Some of the factors is they're higher in fiber than the other grains. And there's some specific things about that fiber. So oats are higher in soluble fiber, and a soluble fiber called beta glucans actually can form like a gel-like substance which can coat the stomach and the digestive tract. Now, just think about that oatmeal that your mother gave you when you were a kid and how gooey it could get. That's what the beta glucans do. So just imagine that inside the stomach and kind of helping coat. So those beta glucans are good for the intestinal lining and the stomach lining. So the other thing is they find there's polyphenols in oats, and there's a specific polyphenol called Avena thromyces, and it's exclusively found in oats. Yeah, Avena is like Avena Thramides. I remember that because I speak Spanish, and oats in Spanish are Avena. So Avena thromyces, and these polyphenols actually reduce inflammation. So if you think about some of the products that for itchy skin, they're oatmeal-based products. That's the Avanthromyces is what's in the oat that's helping reduce that inflammation. So back to her question, do oats increase the risk of inflammation and ulceration? The oats do not increase the risk of inflammation if fed in moderate quantities. I mean, you don't want to be feeding horses like 20 pounds of oats, because then sure, it's probably going to increase the risk of anything. But when you're feeding, small or reasonable amounts of oats, I don't think it should be a problem for increasing the risk of gastric ulceration.
So a reasonable amount would be like a pound or two, but
yeah,
not
a pound or two.
Scoops and scoops and scoops.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So, and then going back then to a diet to support a horse that you suspect otherwise has some gastric issues. So oats, okay, but some of the other grains in high quantities, maybe not so much.
Yeah, not a good idea. Yeah, not a good. I try to avoid high quantities of other grains. So that leads me to the low starch feeds. Those low starch, high fat feeds that are pretty common on the market. Those are actually the best feeds to feed a horse that has gastric ulcers. Like particularly when they're healing, it seems to be like the best choice for that kind of horse. Free choice forage, having forage available as much as possible. I mean, if it can't be free choice, then at least for as many hours of the day as possible. I mean, if you have to put the hay into a slow feeder hay net, so that the amount of time they spend eating hay it gets extended, then that's the best thing to do for that horse. Whatever you can do just to extend the amount of time that they're eating forage, because when a horse is chewing something like hay, they chew a lot more than they would like a bite full of grain, and so there's a buffer in the saliva so the more the horse chews, the more saliva, and then the more buffer goes into the stomach. So that's always a good idea. Get them as much forage as possible. If you're going to feed a concentrate, then small meals, and then spread them out so they're more frequent small meals. Like if you need to be feeding 10 pounds of grain just to maintain the weight on the horse, then give that horse 4 meals a day, so 2.5 pounds each meal. And so the smaller the meal and the more you can spread them out, the better. Then there are some things on the market that have some buffering, and like Purine has a product that's got a special kind of calcium that has a buffering action for the digestive tract. So then you could always consider feeding something like that if your horse has is more at risk for developing ulcers.
So that sounds like good general advice, I think, to anyone who's still working on building a diet for their thoroughbred, is to focus on a low starch, high fat diet with a lot of forage. Would you say that's kind of on track for a good place to start?
Yep, that would be the way to go. Yep.
So start with that. And then I'm going to circle back around to what you said earlier too about ration balancers, that, if you start with good hay and good pasture, then you can go to a ration balancer to get kind of the base for what you need. And then from there, you can add the additional fat and protein that you might need for a horse in training. Does that sound like a good basic formula too?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
So I see there's a message since wanted to know the name of the Purina product. It's Outlast. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it. I haven't fed it, but I've heard a lot about it.
I mean, there's other products on the market all similar, but you would look for something that has it's a special type of calcium, a special source of, not type, a special source of calcium. It's marine sourced calcium, and that's what you're looking for. That is the type of calcium that's been tested and has been shown to have a high buffering capacity.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Well, I'm not seeing any additional questions coming in. I guess we have one last question from Caitlin we can tackle. My horse drops a lot of feed, but my vet and my dentist have both said that his teeth look great. So if a horse is up to date on dental care, what other reasons would there be that they're dropping a significant amount of feed while eating? Maybe they're just a sloth.
Yeah. So, I mean, without seeing the horse and the way he chews, I mean, is there something, I mean, there could be something different in the way his jaws is functioning. Does he have problems with TMJ, you know, that kind of thing. And so she may want to, like, there are osteopaths that can adjust the joint up there, which is responsible for the chewing. So that might be something just to think about. But the other question could be, is the horse doing this like with any feed that you give, that she gives to him, or is it a specific type of feed? Like, does he drop a lot of pellets when he's eating pellets, or does he drop a lot of feed if he's eating a texture feed, or a lot of grains falling out? Is the horse having a harder time chewing like one type of feed than the other? Or is there something in that feed? Is he actually sorting? I mean, they're pretty good with their tongues and they can sort out certain things. Like, it's like, oh, I don't like that little piece of corn, so I'm gonna spit that out, but I'm gonna eat the rest of it. So they are pretty good at doing that. So maybe, you know, without actually watching the horse drop the grain, you know, it's kind of hard to diagnose it from here. But those are just some ideas to look at on why you might be dropping feed.
It sounds like you got a clean bill of health from the dentist, so that's a good thing, you know, that she's done her homework there. So, all right. Jennifer, I see there's a comment from Jennifer Tweed. So if you want to expand on that, Jennifer, if that is a question you want answered, the comment is, I have one that has Cushing's and he has constant diarrhea. So I don't know if she's looking for like a feed reason, that maybe he's not processing feed and why that would be, but it's not really phrased as a question. So I'm sort of guessing at what we're getting at there.
Yeah.
Jennifer, feel free to expand on that.
But I think when she said Cushing's, I mean, it could be a consequence of the Cushing's disease, that he's not digesting well. But has she, you know, what have you tried? Has she had a veterinarian looking at him? Has she tried different feeds? Has she tried a probiotic or something that might help, or a probiotic yeast mixture that might help the microbes in the large intestine to function a little bit better? It kind of depends on what she's tried, but it could just be a natural consequence of the disease itself. Is it diarrhea, or is it like the leaky, some of it's solid and some's a little bit looser? I mean, it's a little hard to know exactly what's going on with this horse, except the Cushing's. It wouldn't surprise me if it was just part of the disease.
Awesome. Okay, so I guess last call for questions from anyone. Betty says, thank you for an excellent session. Good information and much for me to digest. I like what you did there, Betty. That's a good one. Digest, I get it. So any last questions, ask them now. But otherwise, definitely there's, I had thought of a question actually. So we've been talking about, you know, making sure that the diet is balanced. And if the diet's balanced, then everything else generally will take care of itself. What are some good resources for people who want to make sure that they have their diet balanced? Where would you suggest that people start to figure that out?
Okay, well, one service that Kentucky Equine Research offers is a diet evaluation. So you just go to the website, ker.com, and then you just look for, you could just submit your questions, you submit the horse's diet, and then one of the nutrition advisors will get back to you and let you know whether it's a balanced diet or not. We have a ration evaluation program where we can plug in all of the components of the diet. So the forage, grain if you're feeding any supplements, how they all combine work to balance out the diet. So that's what we do, is we offer that for people. It's free of charge, just to see if they have just to see if their horse's diet is meeting the needs of the person.
Awesome. So for anybody listening, the KER website is full of all sorts of really interesting nutrition articles, tons of really good information there. So if you're looking for a good place to start researching your diet and figure out where you want to go from there, I would definitely start at KER.com.
Yeah. And the library itself, like if you just put, you go to library and then put in, if you want to know about diarrhea, you just put a search diarrhea, and all the articles that we have on diarrhea will pop up. So yeah, it's a great resource.
Yeah. So we have one last question just came in from Caitlin, different Caitlin. What about magnesium? I had an OTTB, we put on magnesium and saw a huge change in behavior, presumably a good change. I have 2 on it now and I do not see a difference. Is there different types of magnesium? I feel that this kind is not the same as the first kind that we used.
Oh, okay.
I guess a magnesium supplement.
Okay, so the research on magnesium is sparse, to say the least, but there was one study that actually showed that supplementing a magnesium aspartate was the type of magnesium, had a calming effect on the horses equivalent to ACE, so acepromazine. So yeah. So that's a good thing. So I think why she saw a difference in one horse and not in the others is just, it's really an individual type of thing on whether it does have a calming effect. I'm assuming that's what she saw, was that the horse was calmer and more relaxed.
That's what I'm guessing, yeah.
And you do tend to see this more with thoroughbreds, maybe warm bloods, and then you see that calming effect. And that's why a lot of so-called calming supplements, you'll see that it has magnesium in it. Now, magnesium oxide is probably the least absorbed by horses, but there's other forms of magnesium that are pretty available for absorption. So like some of I don't know which supplement she used the first time and which ones she used the second time, but she may have looked at just in the ingredients whether they specify what type of magnesium it was.
Good to know. Awesome. All right. Well, so if you folks have any more questions, of course, anything posted after the webinar is over, we won't be able to have Dr. Crandell answer live, but definitely the KER website is a great resource for people to start sort of going into the deep, dark rabbit hole of equine nutrition, because you can spend hours and hours and hours on this kind of stuff, which is great. So the KER website is a great place to start. And of course, I think because you guys aren't a feed company, it's a good, sort of unbiased, balanced place to start. Start learning more about nutrition and forming your balanced diet for your horses. So I think to sum up, the big point for thoroughbred owners is start with good quality forage and build a low starch diet from there, and then add your fat and protein as needed. Seem to be the one big takeaway for everybody. And I think we can probably go from there. So hopefully everyone at home is applauding Dr. Crandell for all of her time and her expertise. I know I appreciate it myself as a horse owner, and I'm sure everybody else does too. So if you guys want to give Dr. Crandell a thumbs up on Facebook if you're watching, then I'm sure we'll all appreciate that. Anything else you think we need to know before we call it a night?
No, I guess that's about it. Thank you so much. I think you summed it up just about as best as anybody could have. So you're hired, if you want to join the crew. the nutrition period. And thanks again for asking me to join you.
Yeah, well, we always love having you, and I think we all of us learn a lot. So, so we'll look forward to the next one. And I guess if there's enough requests for people, maybe we can have you back again before the makeover. But I always tell people now is a really good time to really assess your diet and make sure that your horse is on the right track, because you have plenty of time, you know, to make positive changes before October. And of course, just to get your horse set up for success, makeover or not, because, you know, the makeover is just a step in his journey. So, so now is a great time to start building that good diet for your horses. So thanks to everybody who tuned in live and asked questions and sent questions in early. And we'll see you, I guess, for the next one. I'm going to close this out.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
You. Good night.